The shirt was still warm from the lodge dryer when Lena reached for it. It was navy blue, with a white pine tree across the chest, and the words Carter Mason Family Retreat printed underneath. Every cousin already had one. Lena smiled as she lifted the last child-sized shirt from the table. My sister took it out of her hands. "These are for the family picture," Kendra said. Lena blinked. "I know." Kendra folded the shirt against her chest. "I mean real families. Mothers, fathers, and their children." The room went so quiet that I could hear the old ceiling fan clicking above us. Lena looked at me, waiting for me to explain why her aunt was joking. Kendra was not joking. My father did not even look ashamed when he added, "You chose to give her no father, Denise. The rest of us shouldn't have to pretend that choice is the same." I looked past him at the dining table, the catered lunch, the gift bags, and the lodge keycards I had helped pay for. Then I looked at my daughter. Her hands were still held out as if someone might return the shirt. "Understood," I said. I took Lena upstairs, packed our bags, and drove us home before the family photograph was taken. That night, I removed my card from the lodge account. I canceled the recurring payment toward my mother's mortgage. Then I stopped the fixed monthly childcare contribution I had been making for Owen, Kendra's youngest child. By midnight, my phone showed 86 missed calls and notifications. Not one message asked whether Lena was all right. The first said, "What did you do to the lodge payment?" The second said, "Mom's transfer disappeared. Fix it now." The third came from Kendra. "You can't punish the whole family because your daughter didn't get a shirt." I read it twice. Then Lena appeared in the hallway, wearing her pajamas and holding the folder where she kept family photographs. "Mom," she asked quietly, "did you pay for that trip so they would let me be part of the family?" That was the moment I understood the shirt was not what had been taken from her. The payments were not the only thing I needed to stop. Before I tell you what I found after that night, I hope you are doing well wherever you are listening from. Stay with me, and please subscribe to the channel, because the truth behind those payments changed everything. For the first hour of the drive south from Door County, Lena said nothing. She sat buckled into the back seat, with her forehead turned toward the window, watching pine trees and gray water slide past. Usually, she asked for music before I left a parking lot. That day, she asked for nothing. My phone remained face down in the console with driving mode on. It buzzed often enough that the vibration traveled through the plastic between the seats. Each time it happened, Lena's shoulders tightened. I kept both hands on the wheel. My fingers felt numb, but my shoulders ached from holding them too still. Part of me wanted to answer every call and demand that someone explain how a 10-year-old had become a threat to a family photograph. The larger part knew Lena had already heard enough adults discuss whether she counted. At a highway rest stop, I parked beneath a row of bare maples and turned off the engine. Lena kept her eyes closed. I could not tell whether she was asleep or protecting herself from another conversation. There were 23 alerts. My mother had called 6 times. Kendra had called 8. My father had left 2 voicemails. A cousin wrote that the photographer was waiting and asked whether I was really going to ruin the weekend over a misunderstanding. No one wrote Lena's name. I called Pine Hollow Lodge first. I had paid the $1,600 group deposit months earlier and agreed to cover the remaining $1,900 because Mom claimed several relatives could not manage their shares. Everyone else was responsible for rooms, food, and extra charges. I was not canceling what they had already used. I told the manager my card could no longer be charged for the unpaid group balance, and Patricia Carter would need to provide another payment method. The manager paused. "Is there a problem with the reservation?" "No," I said. "There is a problem with who has been expected to solve it." I opened my banking app and canceled the next $400 transfer toward my parents' mortgage. The payment had begun 4 years earlier, after Dad took medical leave and Mom said their savings had been hit harder than expected. It was supposed to last 6 months. 6 months became a year, then another, until the transfer felt like part of the calendar. I left the childcare payment alone until we reached home. I had signed on as an authorized third-party payer when Owen was 2, after Kendra said daycare costs kept her from increasing her work hours. I contributed $600 a month, not the full bill. It was supposed to end once she worked more. Instead, Owen moved into before school, after school, and school break care, and my card kept being charged. I had never asked for an end date. Asking would have made the help sound conditional, and I had spent most of my life trying not to sound selfish. As I pulled back onto the highway, I remembered my mother sitting at my kitchen table 10 years earlier, both hands wrapped around coffee she never drank. "A baby deserves a mother and a father," she had said when I told her I was moving forward with IVF. I answered that a baby deserved adults who wanted the job. Mom looked at me as if I had confused love with stubbornness. After Lena was born, my family stopped criticizing my decision aloud. I thought they had changed. Looking back, their silence began around the same time I became the person who organized trips, covered shortfalls, and made sure no child missed an activity because money was tight. I had spent 10 years trying to prove Lena had not lost a family because of my choice. I had never asked whether the family I was preserving was safe for her. At home, Lena carried her bag upstairs without waiting for me. I canceled the childcare authorization from my authorized payer profile before the next billing cycle, then found her sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor. Her photograph folder lay open. She had removed every picture from the retreat planning pages and stacked them face down. Ticket stubs, old Christmas photographs, and a drawing of the pine tree logo surrounded her knees. "Did they take the picture without us?" she asked. "They probably did," I said. She traced the edge of an old photograph with one finger. It showed her at 6, squeezed between Caleb and Sophie at my parents' Thanksgiving table. I remembered paying for most of that meal. Until then, I had considered it generosity. In Lena's hands, it looked like evidence. "Did you pay for the retreat, so they would let me come?" "Of course not," I said too quickly. Her eyes lifted to mine. Lena had always been quiet, but she was not easy to fool. I took a breath. "I paid because I wanted everyone together. I wanted you to have cousins, photographs, and traditions. But your place should never have depended on what I paid. I should have understood that sooner." She looked back at the folder. "So you did think you had to pay?" The answer hurt because it was not completely wrong. "I thought helping made us part of something," I said. "I was wrong about what made a family safe." Lena did not lean against me or say she understood. She gathered the photographs into a plain envelope and slid it beneath her bed. Later, after she was asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened every message. The total had reached 86, including 34 missed calls, 41 texts, 7 emails, and 4 automated payment alerts. They accused me of humiliating my parents, abandoning innocent children, and using money as a weapon. Kendra wrote that Owen could lose his care before Monday. Mom said I was risking the family house. Dad asked me to be reasonable. Then one final message from Kendra stopped me. "Call me before the children find out you took their college money." I read it again, certain I had misunderstood. I had never paid into any college account. I stared at Kendra's message until the words stopped looking like English. I had never deposited money into a college fund for Caleb, Sophie, or Owen. I had helped with Owen's childcare because Kendra said returning to work would be impossible without it. I had helped Mom and Dad with their mortgage because Dad's medical leave had drained their savings. Neither arrangement had ever included college accounts. My phone vibrated again against the kitchen table. I turned it face down, then opened a notebook instead. Anger would not tell me what had happened to my money. Records might. By 11:53, the combined notification screen showed 34 missed calls, 41 text and group chat messages, 7 emails, and 4 automated alerts from the lodge and childcare system. The calls came from 6 relatives, not one person repeatedly dialing 86 times. That made the number believable, but it did not make it less revealing. Every message wanted something restored. The lodge wanted another payment method for the $1,900 group balance. The childcare portal confirmed that my $600 monthly charge would end before the next billing cycle. Mom wanted her usual mortgage transfer. Kendra wanted me to undo everything before Monday. No one asked why Lena had been so quiet on the drive home. No one asked whether she had cried. No one asked if she had eaten dinner. I opened Kendra's message again and typed one response. I never agreed to pay college accounts. Send me the documents showing what you mean. Her reply appeared almost immediately. You know exactly what you did. I know what I canceled. I don't know why it affects college money. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. You are punishing children because you got offended. I did not answer. She had been given a clear question and had chosen an accusation instead. Mom called again. This time I answered because I wanted to hear whether she would say Lena's name without being prompted. What were you thinking? She demanded before I could speak. Your father and I are sitting here wondering whether our mortgage payment is going to bounce. I stopped my $400 contribution. I did not cancel your mortgage. You know what I mean. No, Mom. I need you to say exactly what you mean. Her breathing changed. She had always treated precision as disrespect, when precision prevented her from changing the subject. We built that money into our budget, she said. You cannot remove it without warning because of a misunderstanding at a family event. A misunderstanding is ordering the wrong shirt size. Kendra took the shirt from Lena and said she was not part of a real family. Dad said I chose to give her no father. You know your sister gets nervous about photographs. She wanted the shirts to look consistent. Consistent with what? With the family units. I looked toward the hallway. Lena's bedroom door was still closed. You mean married couples? And their biological children? That is not what I said. It is what you protected. Mom exhaled sharply. Family disagreements should not become financial punishments. The sentence was so smooth that I knew she had already repeated it to other people. Then why did my financial help depend on me accepting what happened to Lena? It didn't. You are the one connecting those things. I canceled my money after you told my daughter she did not belong. That connection was already there. Mom lowered her voice. Your father and I are elderly. Are you really comfortable making us afraid of losing our home? They were not losing their home because one $400 transfer had stopped. Their mortgage remained active. They still had pensions, Social Security, and the savings Mom had once described as carefully protected. I had helped because I believed they needed breathing room, not because I had accepted permanent responsibility for their house. You have time to adjust your budget, I said. If you need help understanding the numbers, I will explain them. I will not restore the transfer. You sound like you are talking to an employee. No. Employees receive written terms and end dates. She ended the call without saying Lena's name. Dad called. 5 minutes later. Put the payments back, he said. Then we can sit down and discuss everyone's feelings when tempers have cooled. Why does the money have to return before Lena's dignity can be discussed? That is not what I said. It is the order you proposed. He was quiet for a moment. In the background, I heard dishes being moved and Mom speaking to someone else. Kendra was protecting a tradition, he finally said. What tradition requires a 10-year-old to stand outside a family photograph? He did not answer. I waited long enough that the silence became uncomfortable for both of us. Dad? We all could have handled today better. That is not an answer. You left before anyone could explain. I left after you explained it clearly. He asked me to call again in the morning, when I was ready to be reasonable. I told him reason was exactly why I was checking every payment before making another decision. After we hung up, I found a message sent earlier that evening from Michael Grant, a facilities manager in the hospital system where I worked. I had missed a routine payroll check-in before leaving the lodge, and sent him a brief note saying I had a family emergency. His reply contained no demand for details. You don't owe me an explanation. I'm here when you're ready. I read the sentence twice because it felt unfamiliar. My family treated access to me as something they owned. Michael had offered support without treating my pain as information he was entitled to receive. I wrote back that I would review the payroll file in the morning and thanked him. I did not tell him about the shirt, the calls, or the payments. He answered with a simple reminder that the file could wait until Monday. A floorboard creaked behind me. Lena stood at the edge of the kitchen in her pajamas, holding the banister with one hand. Are Caleb and Sophie going to lose college because of me? The question landed harder than anything Kendra had said. No, I told her. Your cousins are not losing college because of you. Then why does Aunt Kendra keep saying college money? I closed the notebook and pulled out the chair beside me. Lena sat, but she kept her body turned slightly away. I don't know yet, I admitted. That is why I am checking. Did you give them money for college? Not that I knew of. She looked at the phone, then at the list of payments in my notebook. What if you did and forgot? I would remember agreeing to something that important. You forgot the childcare was supposed to stop. She did not say it cruelly. That made it worse. I did not forget, I said, then stopped myself. The honest answer was less comfortable. I noticed it kept going, and I chose not to ask when it would end. Why? Because I thought asking would make me sound selfish. Lena studied my face. Were you scared they would not invite us anymore? I could not lie to her twice in one night. Yes, I said. Part of me was. Her eyes filled, but she blinked until the tears stayed where they were. I don't want you to pay people to like me. I don't want that either. She went back upstairs without asking me to follow. I opened a fresh page in the notebook and listed every recurring payment I had made for 4 years. $400 a month toward Mom and Dad's mortgage, $600 a month toward Owen's childcare, $12,000 a year before birthdays, groceries, holidays, and trips, $48,000 in fixed support over 4 years. The number explained the delayed bathroom repair in my townhouse. It explained the retirement contributions I had reduced and the vacations Lena and I kept postponing. None of those choices had endangered us, but together they showed how thoroughly temporary help had become part of everyone else's permanent life. I logged into Owen's childcare portal. My profile did not say parent, guardian, or primary guarantor. It correctly listed me as an authorized third-party payer. 4 years earlier, I had electronically signed a form agreeing to pay a fixed $600 share each month. Kendra remained responsible for the rest. Nothing about the agreement had been altered. No one had forged my signature or transferred legal responsibility to me. Then, I opened the latest invoice. Below my canceled payment method was a note I had never noticed, because my portion had always processed automatically. Remaining balance to be routed to backup source. Mason Family Education Reserve. I read the name several times. Kendra had spent the evening telling relatives there was no money for childcare, yet an education reserve existed as a backup payment source. The next morning, an email arrived from the childcare provider. It confirmed the cancellation of my future recurring charge and attached my original authorization form. The $600 limit was exactly as I remembered it. The second attachment was the newest invoice. At the bottom, beside the Mason Family Education Reserve, was the name of the account administrator, Patricia Carter. My mother controlled a family education fund I had never been told existed. Seeing my mother's name beneath the words Mason Family Education Reserve brought back a feeling I knew too well. It was the feeling of discovering that something described as temporary had quietly become permanent because my cooperation made it convenient for everyone else. I had spent nearly 9 years learning that lesson with Brian. I met him when I was 28. He was divorced, 6 years older than me, and raising 2 children who were still young enough to leave cereal bowls in the sink and fall asleep during movies. I loved them before I understood how dangerous that love could become when someone used it to keep me waiting. Brian knew from the beginning that I wanted a child of my own. He said he wanted another baby too, but there was always a reason the time was not right. First, he needed a promotion. Then we needed to pay down his divorce debt. After that, his daughter was having trouble at school and needed stability. When his son entered middle school, Brian said starting over with a baby would be unfair to him. Each delay sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they consumed most of my 30s. I packed lunches, attended school concerts, helped with science projects, and stayed awake through fevers. When people mistook me for their mother, Brian smiled as though it proved we were already a family. Whenever I asked when we would marry, he kissed my forehead and said we did not need a piece of paper to know what we had. Whenever I asked about a baby, he reminded me that 2 children already loved me. I loved them too. That was why his answer worked for so long. At 37, I scheduled a fertility evaluation without asking him first. I told myself I was gathering information, but some part of me already knew time had become the one thing Brian could not promise to return. I brought home the appointment card and placed it beside his coffee mug. "I need to know where I stand," I said. "If we are going to have a child, we cannot keep saying someday." Brian stared at the card for several seconds. Then he leaned back and rubbed both hands over his face. "I thought you would let this go by now." I remember the refrigerator humming behind him. I remember a drop of coffee sliding down the side of his mug. My mind held on to those small details because the larger meaning arrived too quickly. "You said you wanted another child." I said we would talk about it. "For 9 years?" His expression hardened. "You already have my children. Why isn't that enough for you?" I did not stop loving his children in that moment. I stopped believing that Brian had ever been waiting with me. He had been waiting for me to surrender. I left within 3 weeks. It was not dramatic. There was no screaming in the driveway, and no final attempt to convince him. I packed what belonged to me, and mourned 2 children I had helped raise, but had no legal right to keep seeing. The fertility specialist did not promise me a miracle. She explained that my ovarian reserve was diminished, and that pregnancy was still possible, but waiting several more years for another relationship would lower my chances. She never told me to rush into motherhood. She told me to make decisions using the life I actually had, not the one someone else might eventually offer me. I underwent counseling before choosing a donor. I reviewed my insurance, savings, leave policy, childcare options, and every expense I could imagine. I chose an identity release donor so Lena could request information when she was old enough. I did not want her future questions closed, simply because I was afraid of them. The treatment produced 1 viable embryo. 1. I understood that transferring it did not guarantee a pregnancy. I also understood that doing nothing was a decision of its own. The night before the transfer, my mother called. "A baby deserves a mother and a father," she said. "A baby deserves people who truly want to raise it. You are making this about what you want. Becoming a parent should involve wanting the child." Patricia was silent for a moment before saying, "At least with a husband, the family would look normal." I should have understood then that her concern was never only about Lena's welfare. It was about the picture other people would see. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter to a child who might never exist. I had not looked at it in years, but I knew where it was. The next morning, after finding Patricia's name on the childcare invoice, I opened the fireproof box in my bedroom closet. Beneath Lena's birth certificate and the clinic paperwork was a pale blue envelope. My handwriting looked smaller than I remembered. "I do not know who you will become," I had written. "I only know you will never have to wonder whether you were wanted." I pressed the letter against my chest and understood what I had been doing since Lena was born. I had stopped waiting for Brian to choose motherhood with me. Then I had begun waiting for my family to approve of the motherhood I chose without him. Every retreat I organized, every holiday I financed, every bill I quietly absorbed had made it easier for them to postpone telling me the truth. They did not have to accept my family. They only had to keep me useful enough that I mistook access for belonging. At work that afternoon, I read the same payroll report 3 times without retaining a single number. Michael noticed from the doorway, but did not ask what was wrong. "I can take the benefits reconciliation meeting," he said. "Facilities has only 1 item on the agenda. You already covered for me yesterday." I moved one meeting. I did not donate a kidney. Normally, I would have refused. Accepting help made me feel as though I had entered a contract whose terms had not yet been stated. This time, I closed the report. "Thank you," I said. "I could use the hour." Michael nodded. He did not ask me to explain what he would receive in return. He simply took the meeting from my calendar and left. That small act unsettled me more than it should have. I was accustomed to help that arrived with ownership attached. Michael had offered time without demanding access to the wound that required it. When I picked Lena up from school, she climbed into the car and placed her backpack on the floor instead of beside her. At home, she carried it straight upstairs. A folded worksheet slipped from the unzipped pocket and landed near the stairs. The heading read, "Where My Family Comes From." Students were supposed to create a family heritage display using photographs, traditions, medical history, and stories from both sides of their family. When Lena saw the page in my hand, her face tightened. "I'm not doing it. We can talk to your teacher about changing the assignment. I don't want everyone asking where my dad is. You have answered questions about the donor before." That was before Aunt Kendra said it made us not real. I sat beside her on the stairs. What she said was wrong, but Grandpa agreed. There was no simple answer that could make those words harmless. Lena looked down at her knees. "Did you have me because Brian didn't choose you?" My throat closed around the first response that came to me. I wanted to say Brian had nothing to do with her. That would not have been completely true. Losing those years had forced me to decide what I would no longer surrender. "I didn't have you because nobody chose me," I said. "I had you after I stopped letting other people decide whether I was allowed to become your mother." She watched my face carefully. "If Brian had changed his mind, would you have wanted his baby instead of me? I might have lived a different life if he had told me the truth sooner, but there is no other child who could replace you. Once you existed, even as one tiny embryo, you were not an idea anymore. You were you." I brought her the blue envelope and let her read the first lines of the letter. I did not hand it over as proof that she owed me gratitude. I gave it to her because the truth belonged to her too. She read the sentence about never wondering whether she was wanted twice. Then she folded the letter carefully and returned it to me. "I still don't want to do the assignment." "That is all right. We will ask for another way." She leaned against my shoulder, but only for a moment. The wound had been named. It had not healed. My phone chimed from the kitchen. Kendra had posted in the extended family group chat. Denise promised to support the children through the school year. She is now using their futures to punish us. Before I could respond, Lena's tablet lit up beside her. A message from Caleb appeared on the screen. "Why is your mom taking our college money?" Lena held the tablet out to me, as though Caleb's message might burn her fingers. "Why is your mom taking our college money?" Before I could answer, another message appeared beneath it. Sophie had written, "Do you hate us now?" Lena looked from the screen to me. "I don't hate them." "I know. Then why do they think I do?" Because their mother had found the one weapon she knew I would struggle to defend against. She had moved the argument away from what happened at the lodge and placed 3 innocent children between us. I took the tablet, but I did not type a response. "You don't have to explain adult money to your cousins," I said. "And you don't have to argue with them. But Caleb thinks we took something from him." "We did not take money from anyone. I stopped paying bills that were never supposed to be mine forever." Lena's eyes stayed fixed on the messages. "What if his college deposits stop? Then the adults responsible for those accounts will decide what they can afford. That is not your fault." A third message arrived from Owen through Sophie's account. He was 6 and still dictated most of what he wanted to say. "Mom says I might have to leave my school friends." Lena's face crumpled before she turned away. Kendra had not told Owen that she remained responsible for his care. She had not explained that my $600 covered only part of his program or that no one was removing him the next morning. She had given him the version most likely to frighten him, then allowed that fear to reach my daughter. "I can tell you want to fix this," I said. "If you turn the payment back on, Owen can stay. And what will that teach you? That he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't, but neither did you. She pulled her knees against her chest. I'm the reason you stopped it. No. What they did showed me that I needed to stop. To Lena, the difference probably sounded like something adults said when they wanted a child to feel better. I could see that she did not fully believe me. My extended family group chat had grown into a running account of my supposed cruelty. Kendra wrote that I had promised to support the children through the school year. An aunt replied that disagreements between sisters should never interfere with education. Someone else said Lena would eventually forget a shirt, but Caleb might remember losing a college opportunity for the rest of his life. No one repeated what Kendra had said when she took the shirt. No one mentioned Dad's comment about my choosing to give Lena no father. By the time the story reached relatives who had not been at the retreat, Lena had become a disappointed child. Kendra had become a tired mother protecting a photograph, and I had become a woman, using money to demand obedience. I typed one message to the group. I did not cancel any college account. I ended my future payments toward my parents' mortgage, the unpaid lodge balance, and my fixed contribution toward Owen's care. Please stop discussing this with the children. Kendra responded within a minute. You started this in front of the children. I set the phone down without answering. She wanted a public argument because arguments created enough noise to hide facts. The package arrived the following afternoon. It was addressed to Lena, in my mother's handwriting. Inside was the navy shirt, folded neatly inside a clear plastic bag. Patricia had included a note on one of her floral cards. When everyone calms down, Lena may wear this in a makeup photo. There was no apology. The note made the shirt sound like a privilege that remained available if we corrected our behavior. Lena stood across the kitchen island while I held the package. Do you want to open it? I asked. She shook her head. She already said it wasn't mine. She is offering it back. No, she's offering a picture. I left the shirt sealed inside the plastic and placed it on the counter. Lena walked upstairs without touching it. That evening, I called Mark. Kendra's husband was not innocent. He had been at the lodge and had said nothing while his wife took the shirt from Lena. But if I wanted to understand the money, I needed to know what he believed the arrangement had been. He answered cautiously. Is this about the childcare payment? It is about several things. I'm asking one question at a time. He sighed. All right. What did Kendra tell you about my $600? That you volunteered to help until she could get steadier hours. That was 4 years ago. I know. Why did you think it was still continuing? Another pause followed. She said you didn't mind. That is not an answer. She said you had fewer expenses. Fewer than whom? Denise. I don't want to get in the middle of this. You were in the room when my daughter was told she did not belong. You are already in it. His voice lowered. Kendra said you didn't have the same real family expenses we did. The phrase made my grip tighten around the phone. What does that mean? She said you had one child and no husband to support. We have 3 children, sports, school costs, everything. Mark worked full-time. Kendra worked part-time by choice. Their house was larger than mine, their cars were newer, and their children attended activities Lena and I had often skipped because I was helping cover someone else's bills. Did you know my parents have a Mason family education reserve? Yes, but I assumed it was your mother's retirement money. What does it pay for? I know Patricia contributes to the kids' 529 plans. Kendra can view them, but your mother owns the accounts. There's also some kind of savings fund for education and maybe a future down payment. I don't manage it. For all 4 grandchildren? He hesitated long enough to answer the question before he spoke. I've only seen accounts for our 3. I ended the call without accusing him of anything. I still had no proof that my money had entered those funds, but I no longer needed to believe it had gone directly into them for the connection to matter. If I paid $400 toward my parents' mortgage, Patricia kept $400 of her own money available for something else. If I covered $600 of Owen's childcare, Kendra and Mark kept $600 available for their household. My support might not have been stolen. It might have been used exactly as promised while quietly allowing their money to build futures that excluded Lena. That possibility hurt more than a simple unpaid bill. I called Patricia and asked for the mortgage statements and the household budget covering the 4 years I had contributed. "You know what the mortgage costs," she said. "I know what I paid. I want to understand why you still needed it." Families help without demanding audits. Families also do not assign one daughter permanent bills while telling her child she is outside the family. You are turning love into accounting. You already did that when you built my payments into your budget. Patricia's voice sharpened. If you trusted us, you would not need records. If you respected me, you would not be afraid to show them. She refused. After the call, I found Lena at her desk with her scrapbook open. She had removed the blank page, reserved for the retreat photograph, and was cutting it into strips. "Mom," she said without looking up, "maybe you should keep paying until Owen is older." The old answer rose inside me immediately. It would be easier. It would stop some of the messages. It might protect the cousins from a conflict they had not created. For a few dangerous seconds, I imagined restoring the payment and postponing the rest. Then I looked at the sealed shirt on her dresser. If I turn it back on because they made you feel guilty, what would that teach you? That helping people is good. It would teach you that people can hurt you, then make you responsible for everyone affected when you say no. She stopped cutting. "I don't want Owen hurt. Neither do I. But his parents have choices. You are not one of their payment methods." At work the next morning, Michael found me staring at an email I had not opened. I told him only that my family was using the children to pressure me into restoring money. He did not tell me to forgive them or cut them off. He rested one hand on the back of the empty chair across from my desk. "If Lena were grown and this were happening to her, what would you tell her she owed them?" "Nothing." "Then don't teach her otherwise." He left before I could turn the answer into another conversation. That afternoon, Dad called from his car. "Your mother keeps the household numbers in a spreadsheet," he said. "She thought you knew." "I asked for it." She refused. "I'll send it." "Did you know about the education reserve?" "I knew there were accounts for the children." "Which children?" He did not answer directly. "Look at the file." A few minutes later, the workbook arrived in my inbox. The visible tabs were ordinary: mortgage, utilities, insurance, retirement withdrawals. I almost believed there was nothing more. Then I opened the sheet menu and selected Show All Sheets. One hidden tab appeared. Its name was Legacy Plan. I did not open the hidden sheet immediately. The name Legacy Plan sat beneath the ordinary household tabs, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. Before clicking, I saved a copy of the workbook to my own secure folder and opened the version history. George had sent me a file the family already shared. I was not breaking into anything, but after 4 years of being told I misunderstood every agreement, I wanted a record of what had existed before anyone could change it. Patricia had created the hidden tab 3 years and 11 months earlier. That was less than a month after my first mortgage contribution and the beginning of my childcare payments for Owen. I opened it. At first, the sheet looked disappointingly ordinary. There were columns for Mom and Dad's pension income, Social Security, mortgage, utilities, property taxes, insurance, and retirement withdrawals. Another section listed family expenses and contributions. My name appeared 3 times. Denise, mortgage support, $400 monthly. Denise Owen, childcare subsidy, $600 monthly. Denise, Pine Hollow Lodge, $1,600 deposit and $1,900 planned group balance. The retreat entry had been added recently, but the first 2 rows repeated month after month. Beside them, Patricia had created a column labeled Funds Released for Legacy Goals. I read the heading several times before scrolling farther. 3 separate rows carried the names Caleb Mason, Sophie Mason, and Owen Mason. Each was connected to a 529 education account owned by Patricia, with the children listed as beneficiaries. The monthly deposits had been small before my support began. Within weeks of my first mortgage transfer and childcare payment, Patricia increased all 3 contributions. Below them was another account labeled First Home, Caleb. The amounts were not enormous. That made the betrayal more believable and somehow more painful. There was no secret fortune, no single transfer large enough to look criminal. Just steady deposits, month after month, made possible because I was paying expenses everyone described as emergencies. The spreadsheet did not say my $400 went directly into a college account. It did not need to. My contribution covered part of my parents' mortgage. Their own income remained available. My $600 reduced the amount Kendra and Mark needed for Owen's care. Their household kept more of its money. Patricia had treated those savings as resources that could be redirected toward the grandchildren she had selected as the family's future. Over 4 years, I had contributed $48,000 in fixed support before counting holidays, groceries, birthdays, and the lodge deposit. The workbook showed that during those same years, deposits into the 3 education accounts increased, and the First Home Fund grew steadily. My family had not been living through one endless emergency. They had been building assets. I scrolled through the rows again, searching for Lena's name. I told myself there might be a separate section. Perhaps Patricia assumed I had already opened an account for her. Perhaps the family plan covered the Mason children because Kendra had 3, and I had only 1. I found Lena near the bottom. Lena Carter. Future funding responsibility, Denise. Carter family contribution, 0. I stopped breathing for a few seconds. The words were not openly cruel. There was no insult beside her name, no sentence about IVF, no reference to a missing father. It was the kind of language that could be defended as practical. That was what made it unmistakable. The other grandchildren were shared obligations. Lena was mine alone. I thought of every time Patricia had praised me for being responsible. Every time Kendra thanked me for giving the kids stability. Every time Dad said family helped. Family while I postponed replacing the bathroom flooring that had begun curling near the tub. I had believed I was preserving a network around Lena. The workbook showed that they saw the arrangement differently. My money belonged inside the family system. My daughter did not. The humiliation arrived before anger. I imagined Patricia opening the spreadsheet after one of my transfers cleared, adding another deposit to Caleb's home fund, then calling me to say how lucky she was to have one dependable daughter. I remembered Kendra sending photographs of Owen at his after-school program and writing that she could not do any of it without me. She had meant it literally. I returned to the version history. Patricia had created the plan and made most of the edits. Kendra's initials appeared beside changes to the childcare figures and several notes about education contributions. George had not edited much, but the activity log showed that he opened the sheet repeatedly. He had viewed it the month it was created. He had viewed it again before Christmas. He had viewed it 3 weeks before the retreat. Dad had spent years saying Mom handled the finances. The record showed that even if he had not designed the system, he had seen it often enough to know Lena was absent from it. One comment beside the education accounts caught my attention. Protect allocations for children continuing both family lines. I stared at the phrase, trying to understand what it meant. Perhaps Patricia was thinking about surnames. Caleb carried Mark's last name, while Lena carried mine. Perhaps this was some old-fashioned idea about inheritance moving through married households. Maybe Dad had insisted that money go to grandchildren connected to 2 extended families. Every mortgage transfer matched the workbook. Every $600 childcare payment matched the dates Patricia used to calculate released funds. The childcare invoices confirmed my fixed share and showed the Mason Family Education Reserve as the backup source for other costs. Nothing had been forged. Nothing had been withdrawn from my account without permission. My family had not needed to steal from me because I had kept giving them exactly what they requested. They had only lied about why they still needed it. I called Mark again. "I found the accounts," I said. He was silent for a moment. "The 529S? 3 of them. Patricia owns them. Your children are the beneficiaries." "That sounds right." "Did you know the contributions increased when I began paying the mortgage and childcare?" "No." "Did you know there was a first home fund for Caleb?" "I knew Patricia talked about helping him someday. I didn't know there was a separate account." "Did you ever ask where the money came from?" He exhaled slowly. "I assumed your parents were doing better than they said." "And you were comfortable letting me keep paying?" "That was between you and them." "No, Mark. You benefited from it. I didn't create that spreadsheet." "You did not need to create it. You only needed not to question why my help never ended." He did not argue. His silence was the first honest thing he had offered me. When Lena came home, the sealed navy shirt was still on her dresser. She had turned the plastic bag face down, so the pine tree logo no longer showed. She found me at the dining table with my laptop closed and my notebook beside it. "Did you find out about the college money?" she asked. "I found out there are accounts for your cousins." "Is there one for me?" I could have softened the answer. I could have said we would discuss it later or reminded her that I had savings in her name. Those things were true, but they would not answer what she had asked. "No," I said. "There is not one from Grandma and Grandpa." Her expression barely changed. She had already prepared herself for the answer. "Did they forget?" "No." That was the hardest word I had spoken all week. She looked toward the stairs, where the shirt waited in her room. "So they lied?" "They hid something unfair. I need to understand all of it before I explain the details to you." "Was it because of how I was born?" "I don't know yet." She nodded, but disappointment settled across her face. I realized children did not need every financial figure to understand when adults had ranked them. After she went upstairs, I wrote one email to Patricia, George, Kendra, and Mark. I kept it brief. "I have reviewed the legacy plan and verified the listed payments against my bank and childcare records. No payment will resume. We will meet after I finish reviewing the correspondence attached to the workbook. Until then, do not contact Lena directly or use the children to carry messages." Patricia replied that the file had been taken out of context. Kendra said family financial planning was private and accused me of looking for reasons to punish her. George wrote only, "We should talk before you assume the worst." I did not answer any of them. The workbook contained an attachments folder. Most files were account summaries and notes from annual family budget discussions. Near the bottom was an email chain titled Legacy Clarification. I clicked once, and the preview opened. The first visible lines were from Patricia. "Lena's future belongs to Denise alone. She chose to create a family without a paternal side." The email thread was worse than the spreadsheet because no one had written it in anger. Patricia's language was calm, orderly, and almost professional, as though she were explaining an insurance policy rather than deciding which grandchildren counted as a shared responsibility. She wrote that family resources should support children with 2 family lines and broader obligations, and that Lena's future belonged to me because I had chosen to create a household without a paternal side. According to my mother, that was not exclusion. It was responsible planning. Kendra's replies removed any doubt about what the words meant. She argued that her children would someday be expected to represent both the Carter and Mason families, while Lena would inherit everything I owned and had no second household competing for her loyalty. She wrote that my unconventional choice came with financial consequences I had accepted when I pursued IVF alone. The logic would have been self-serving even if Mark's parents had never helped their grandchildren, but they did. They paid for summer camps, gave substantial birthday gifts, and had already promised to help Caleb with his first car. What disturbed me most was how long the hierarchy had existed. Kendra had discussed keeping certain gifts within complete family units. Patricia had suggested prioritizing vacations and photographs that showed the branches continuing properly. The shirt at Pine Hollow. Lodge had not been a cruel sentence invented in one impatient moment. It was the visible edge of a system they had already applied to money, holidays, gifts, and the family image they wanted other people to see. George had replied only once in the entire thread. I don't like excluding a child, but Patricia knows the numbers. I read the sentence several times, looking for some sign that he had challenged them privately or refused to participate. There was nothing else. My father had recognized the harm, named it, and then treated his discomfort as though it were a moral contribution. His hesitation had not protected Lena. It had protected him from admitting he had chosen the easier side. A car door slammed outside before I finished saving copies of the emails. Through the front window, I saw Kendra marching up my walkway without a coat, despite the cold. She knocked hard enough to rattle the narrow window beside the door. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind me, so she could not walk past me into the house. You had no right to go through private family files, she said. Dad sent me the workbook. It was shared with me, and I reviewed the records attached to it. He sent you the household budget, not permission to dig through every hidden tab and old email. You helped edit those files. You knew my payments were listed beside the money going into your children's accounts. Her face tightened. Those are Mom's accounts. She owns them, and she decides how to use her money. That would be true if she had not spent 4 years telling me she needed my money to keep her home. No one forced you to help. The sentence was familiar, because Brian had once used its softer version. No one had forced me to wait. No one had forced me to believe him. People who benefited from deception like to describe cooperation as informed consent after the truth became inconvenient. You are right, I said. No one forced me. That is why I have stopped. Kendra glanced toward the front window. Are you really going to discuss this on the porch where Lena might hear us? You came here without asking. You do not get to use my daughter's presence as a reason I should let you inside. She lowered her voice, but not her anger. The allocations were practical, Denise. You have 1 child. I have 3. Of course, the family planned differently. Planning differently would mean dividing limited help according to need. You accepted money from the mother of 1 child, so your 3 children could receive more. You make more than I do. I also raised Lena on 1 income. You chose that life. I chose to become her mother. I did not choose to become your household's second income. Kendra folded her arms. You have fewer obligations. You don't have a husband, 3 children, all the school costs, activities, and everything else we manage. Raising a child alone is not fewer obligations. It is fewer adults sharing them. For the first time, she had no immediate answer. Then she changed the subject to Owen, because she knew guilt worked better on me than arithmetic. She said losing my $600 contribution could disrupt his childcare, interfere with her shifts, and force her to disappoint a 6-year-old who had done nothing wrong. She spoke as though I had appeared one morning and withdrawn a promise that was meant to last forever. I will pay the provider directly for a 2-week transition, I said. You will sign a written end date, confirming that the arrangement is finished. And you will stop contacting Lena or allowing the children to carry messages about money. Kendra stared at me. 2 weeks does not solve anything. It gives you time to adjust your work schedule or choose another program. What happens after that? You and Mark pay for your child. Her mouth opened slightly, and I saw the truth before she said it. The emergency was not that Owen would lose care tomorrow. The emergency was that I had attached an ending to something she believed I owed indefinitely. I'm not signing some contract that makes it look like I did something wrong, she said. It is not an admission. It is an end date. You are trying to control me with money. No, I am stopping you from controlling me with children. Kendra stepped closer and pointed toward the house. Lena is going to grow up knowing her cousins lost opportunities because her mother could not handle one uncomfortable comment. The comment was only uncomfortable to you because I stopped paying afterward. Her face changed then, not into remorse, but calculation. She realized I had read enough to understand the shirt was not separate from the money. Without another word, She turned and walked back to her car. She rejected the 2-week transition offer that could have protected Owen, because what she wanted was not a transition. She wanted restoration. Michael arrived 40 minutes later with a sealed envelope from work and the laptop charger I had left in my office. He saw Kendra's tire marks near the curb and the expression on my face, but he did not ask who had been there until I told him. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold between us, while I explained the offer I had made and how close I had come to promising more just to stop the conflict. Part of me still wants to turn everything back on, I admitted. Not because they deserve it, because I want the children out of the middle. Helping someone through a transition is generosity, Michael said. Being assigned their life is ownership. I looked at him. Kendra would say I offered help and changed the rules. You offered temporary help. She decided temporary meant until you stopped being useful. He did not tell me what to do next, or offer to speak to anyone. He simply added, "Whatever you decide, make sure it is a decision you can explain to Lena without teaching her that boundaries are cruelty." After Michael left, I found Lena sitting halfway up the stairs. She had heard more than I realized. Her expression told me she understood that the family had deliberately saved for her cousins while assigning her future entirely to me. "Why do Caleb and Sophie deserve help for college and I don't?" she asked. I sat on the step below her so she would not have to look up at me. "They do not deserve more than you. The adults made an unfair decision because they believed your family counted differently." "Because I don't have a dad?" "Yes." She pressed her lips together. "Are they going to make an account for me now that you found out?" "I don't know. And I am not going to ask them to buy their way out of what they did. You already have savings I created for you. This is not about making them give us the same amount. It is about making sure they never use you to keep me quiet again." Lena went upstairs and returned with the navy shirt still inside its plastic bag. She opened the package carefully, smoothed the fabric across her knees, and studied the white pine tree. I expected her to throw it away or ask me to return it. Instead, she folded it along the original creases. "I want to bring this when we talk to them," she said. "You do not have to be in that room. I know. You also do not have to forgive anyone or explain how you were born. I know that too." She placed the folded shirt on the table. "I don't want them to give it back. I want them to answer me." Until that moment, I had thought protecting Lena meant keeping her outside every confrontation and speaking for her whenever adults caused harm. Looking at the shirt beneath her hands, I understood that protection could also mean making room for her voice without asking her to carry the whole fight. Patricia's email arrived before dinner. She had scheduled what she called an emergency family budget meeting at the house where Kendra and I had grown up. She wrote that everyone needed to attend and that my payments must be restored before the end of the week to prevent avoidable harm to the family. I replied that I would attend, but I did not agree to restore anything. Lena read the message over my shoulder. She touched the folded shirt, then looked at me with a steadiness that made her seem both older and painfully young. "I'm coming for 10 minutes, she said. The night before the meeting, I spread the documents across the kitchen table in 3 neat stacks. The first held the mortgage transfers and childcare invoices. The second held the legacy plan and its version history. The third held the email thread that explained why Lena had been assigned nothing. I marked only the pages I had received legally from the family workbook, my bank, and the childcare provider. Across from me, Lena sat with the navy retreat shirt folded between her hands. "You can come for 10 minutes, I told her. "You can leave sooner. You do not have to explain IVF, defend me, forgive anyone, or un changeu letter. If anyone speaks to you in a way that makes you feel unsafe, I will end the meeting." What if they say I'm being rude? Then they can live with thinking a 10-year-old was rude. You do not have to stay polite while adults decide whether you belong. She smoothed one corner of the shirt, but her attention was not on the fabric. "What if Grandma cries? You are not responsible for stopping her from crying. What if Owen cries because you won't pay anymore? His parents will take care of him. That is their job. I kept my voice steady because the truth had to sound dependable, not defensive. You are allowed to care about your cousins without becoming responsible for their bills. Lena nodded, though I could see she was still carrying more than she had said. The kitchen clock ticked behind me. I waited instead of filling the silence. And eventually she asked the question that hurt more than anything in the spreadsheet. Did you have me because you couldn't find anyone who wanted a family with you? For a moment, I could not speak. I had prepared numbers, dates, and boundaries for every adult I expected to face. I had not prepared for my daughter to wonder whether her life began as evidence of my rejection. I loved Brian, I said. I believed him when he said we would marry and have a baby. I stayed because I trusted promises he kept moving into the future. That was my mistake. He was not a monster, and I was not foolish for loving him. But I stayed longer than I should have, after his actions stopped matching his words. Lena looked down at the shirt. So when he said no, you had me. When he finally told me the truth, I stopped waiting for him. That is not the same thing as replacing him with you. I reached across the table, but I did not take her hand until she turned her palm toward mine. You are not what I chose because no man chose me. You were the first thing I chose after I stopped asking other people for permission to live my own life. Her fingers tightened around mine. But if he had said yes sooner, I wouldn't be here. That is true in the way 1,000 different choices could have made both of our lives different. But you were never a consolation prize for the life I lost. Once I decided to try for you, I wanted you. Not a husband, not a picture, and not a way to prove anything to anyone. I held her gaze and said the sentence I needed her to remember. I didn't settle for you, Lena. I stopped settling when I chose you. I went upstairs and brought down the pale blue envelope. A few days earlier, I had shown her only the opening lines because she had been too hurt to read more. This time, I placed the entire letter in front of her and told her she could stop whenever she wanted. She read slowly, tracing the old folds with one finger. I had written it before the embryo transfer, before I knew whether the pregnancy would work, before there was a heartbeat or a name. Near the end, she found the line she already knew. You will never have to wonder whether you were wanted. Her eyes filled, but she did not collapse into my arms or suddenly become healed. One tear slipped onto the paper, and she wiped it away carefully with her sleeve. You wrote this before you knew I would be me. I knew there might be a child, and I knew I already wanted to make room for that child. When you arrived, you became more specific and more complicated and more wonderful than anything I could have imagined. She read another paragraph, then folded the letter along its original creases. I might still want to know about the donor someday. You are allowed to. Would that hurt you? No. Curiosity about where parts of you came from is not a rejection of me. You can want medical information, a name, or answers. You can also change your mind more than once. What if you and Michael are together by then? The question surprised me enough that I smiled. What does Michael have to do with donor information? I don't know. Maybe he would think I was looking for a dad. I considered pretending not to understand what she was really asking, but she had already endured enough adults hiding inside careful language. I like Michael, I said. I do not know what will happen between us, and I am not going to use any relationship to prove that our family is normal. We already are. Does he want to be my father? He has never asked for that role. He cares about you because you are important to me, but he has not tried to name himself in your life. Lena's shoulders lowered. That answer reassured her more than a promise would have. Good, she said. I don't want someone deciding that for me. Neither do I. We returned to the meeting folder. I explained that I would present only the records I was entitled to see. I would separate what the documents proved from what I believed they meant. The mortgage statements proved my parents had continued accepting support after the original crisis passed. The childcare records proved my contribution was fixed and voluntary. The legacy plan proved the money freed by my help had been directed toward Kendra's children while Lena was excluded. The emails proved that exclusion was deliberate. I told Lena I would not debate whether a family needed a father to be legitimate. That question was not open for discussion. I would state that the payments were permanently over, require specific apologies before any future contact, and refuse every request for another informal rescue. I would not demand that Patricia create a matching account for Lena, because a quality purchased under pressure would not repair the belief behind the exclusion. What would a real apology sound like? Lena asked. It would name what they did. It would not say they were sorry you felt hurt. It would say they treated the way you were born as if it made you less worthy, and that they were wrong. She looked at the shirt again. I don't want to make a speech. You do not have to speak at all. I want to ask one thing. I waited while she tried several versions under her breath. I did not correct her wording or make it sound older. Finally, she said, if I wasn't part of this family, why was my mother's money allowed to be? The sentence was simple enough for a child, and sharp enough that no adult could hide behind accounting. She decided she would place the shirt on the table after asking it, then leave. She did not want the shirt returned, replaced, or photographed. She wanted them to see that she no longer needed it to prove she belonged. The next morning, we drove to the house where Kendra and I had grown up. Lena held the shirt on her lap. I kept the evidence folder beside me and reminded her twice that she could change her mind before we entered. She said she still wanted her 10 minutes. Patricia opened the door without greeting us. From the hallway, I could see the old dining table covered with mortgage statements, childcare invoices, and printed copies of the legacy plan. Someone had arranged the chairs, as if this were a hearing, and I had been summoned to defend myself. Beside the chair marked for me, Patricia had placed a new payment authorization form and a pen. Patricia pointed toward the chair beside the payment authorization form, as if the meeting could not begin until I occupied the place she had chosen for me. I set my folder on the table but remained standing. Lena stayed beside me, holding the folded navy shirt against her stomach. We should deal with the urgent matters first, Patricia said. The mortgage contribution is due next week. Owen's childcare needs a stable payment method, and the lodge has already contacted 3 relatives about the remaining balance. No financial discussion begins until you acknowledge what happened to Lena, I said. Kendra leaned back in her chair. Mark sat beside her with both hands clasped on the table, while George stared down at the printed spreadsheet in front of him. We have acknowledged it, Patricia replied. The retreat became emotional, and an unfortunate misunderstanding occurred over how the shirts were organized. It was not a misunderstanding. Kendra took the shirt from Lena and said the matching shirts were for real families with mothers and fathers. Dad told my daughter that I chose to give her no father. George raised his eyes. I should not have phrased it that way. You did not phrase a harmless thought badly. You agreed that she did not belong in the photograph. Kendra shook her head. The shirts were organized by household units. Couples and their children were supposed to match. You turned it into a statement about Lena's worth. You made the statement about her worth when you removed the shirt from her hands. I was trying to keep the photograph consistent with families you approved of. Patricia touched the authorization form with 2 fingers. We can spend the entire morning arguing over language, or we can prevent real harm to several people. Lena's grip tightened around the shirt. I looked down at her and asked whether she still wanted her 10 minutes. She nodded, walked to the table, and placed the shirt directly on top of the new payment form. The adults watched her, but no one spoke. Lena looked first at Patricia, then at Kendra. If I wasn't part of this family, why was my mother's money allowed to be? Kendra's expression hardened. Your mother's money helped your grandparents keep their home and helped Owen stay in childcare. It was never about buying anyone's place in the family. That isn't what I asked. Kendra looked at me as if I had coached the words into her. I had helped Lena understand the documents, but the question belonged entirely to her. Patricia leaned forward. Sweetheart, of course we want you. This is an adult disagreement about money and traditions. Lena glanced at the shirt. Then, why couldn't I stand in the picture? Patricia opened her mouth, but nothing came out quickly enough to sound true. Lena pushed the shirt farther across the table. I don't want it anymore. I wanted to know whether you wanted me. I had arranged for her to spend the rest of the meeting in the small den at the back of the house, where she had played with her cousins when they were younger. She carried her tablet and headphones with her, and I reminded her that she could call me immediately if she wanted to leave. She did not look at anyone as she walked away. When the den door closed, Patricia spoke through clenched teeth. You had no right to put a child in the middle of this. Kendra put the children in the middle when she told them I had taken their college money. You sent Lena the shirt instead of an apology. She asked to speak because every adult in this room had already spoken about her. I opened my folder and placed the mortgage transfers, childcare records, legacy plan, and email thread in separate stacks. I did not distribute every page or drown the room in figures. I showed them only the sequence they had spent the previous week, trying to deny. My $400 mortgage contribution began after Dad's medical leave. My $600 childcare contribution began when Owen was 2, and Kendra said she needed temporary help while increasing her work hours. Within weeks of those payments beginning, the contributions into the 529 accounts increased. The first home fund for Caleb began growing. The legacy plan described my support as money that released family resources for those goals. Patricia lifted her chin. Those were my accounts, funded with my money. I was legally entitled to decide how to use it. I am not accusing you of stealing. I am saying you continued presenting yourself as unable to manage the mortgage while directing your available income into accounts for Kendra's children. We were planning responsibly. You were planning with money my help freed while telling me the crisis had never ended. Kendra tapped one finger against the spreadsheet. My children have greater total needs. There are 3 of them, and Denise has 1. You and Mark have 2 incomes, even when one is part-time. Your children receive support from both sides of their family. I support Lena on 1 income, while also paying part of your household expenses and part of Mom and Dad's. Patricia looked at me as if I were deliberately ignoring something obvious. Lena will inherit your townhouse, your retirement accounts, and whatever savings you have. Kendra's assets must be divided among 3 children. That might justify different dollar amounts. It does not explain why the family contribution beside Lena's name was 0. She is your responsibility. All grandchildren are their parents' responsibility. Yet only 1 was placed outside the shared plan. George shifted in his chair. I opened the email thread to the page containing his response. I don't like excluding a child, but Patricia knows the numbers, I read aloud. You wrote that after Mom and Kendra discussed keeping legacy funds with children who continued both family lines. George rubbed his forehead. I did not agree with the wording. You knew Lena was excluded. I knew there was no account for her. I assumed your mother would reconsider as Lena got older. You hoped someone else might eventually undo a decision you already knew was wrong. I should have spoken. You did speak. At the lodge, you spoke against Lena. His face folded in a way I had never seen before. I heard what was said. I added to it. I was wrong. The apology was specific, but it did not erase the fact that Lena had heard him choose the photograph over her. I told him I recognized that he had finally named what he did. I did not promise access, forgiveness, or another chance on his preferred timeline. Kendra pushed her chair back slightly. This is becoming ridiculous. My children have a mother and a father. They have 2 family lines to represent. Lena only has you. The room became silent. The sentence matched the spreadsheet, the email thread, and the shirt. No one could call it a misunderstanding anymore. I looked at Kendra. Then from now on I will be enough. But my money will no longer be required to make your family look complete. Patricia slid the authorization form toward me. Do not make permanent decisions in anger. I made the old decisions in fear. I was afraid that if I stopped being useful, Lena and I would stop being included. I am not signing this. I pushed the form back. The lodge balance will be divided among the adults who attended. My mortgage contribution is permanently over. I offered a 2-week transition payment directly to Owen's provider if Kendra signs a written end date. That offer remains open until tomorrow. After that, she and Mark are responsible. I will not finance future retreats, holidays, or family events. No one contacts Lena directly without my permission. You are punishing the entire family, Patricia said. No, I am ending a benefit. The consequences belong to the people who built their lives around money they believed they could take while rejecting the child it came from. Mark finally spoke. I benefited from it. I knew Denise kept paying, and I did not ask why. I'll work out the childcare with Kendra. Kendra turned toward him. You are agreeing with her now? I am agreeing that Owen is our responsibility. He did not defend me or condemn his wife. He simply accepted the part he had avoided, which was more accountability than anyone else had offered. I gathered my records. Without thinking, I picked up the shirt and carried it to the den. Lena removed her headphones when she saw me and asked whether we were finished. I told her we were. Outside, I handed her the folded shirt. She looked at it for a moment, then turned back toward the open front door. She walked inside, placed the shirt on the entry bench, and returned with empty hands. Neither Patricia nor George tried to stop us. On the drive home, Lena watched the houses pass beyond the window. After several quiet miles, she asked, "What happens to them now?" "They live on what belongs to them," I said. For the first few days after the meeting, my family's outrage remained loud enough to make silence feel suspicious. Then the calls slowed, the group chat quieted, and the consequences became ordinary. The lodge divided the unpaid balance among the adults who had stayed. No one was thrown out, and no one lost a reservation already used. They simply had to pay for the weekend they had expected me to finish funding. Kendra refused my 2-week transition offer because it required a written end date. By the following Monday, she had increased her hours at work. Mark had moved 2 early shifts so he could handle pickups, and they transferred Owen to a less expensive after-school program. She told relatives I had forced her back to full-time work, although she was still several hours short of it. For a while, I corrected every exaggeration I heard. Then I understood that defending myself to people committed to misunderstanding me was another form of unpaid labor. Some relatives asked to see the documents. After reading the legacy plan and the email chain, 2 cousins apologized for joining the group chat attacks. Others remained loyal to Patricia and called the accounts private family business. One aunt said the whole conflict could have been avoided if I had shown more grace at the lodge. I told her grace had already lasted 4 years, then stopped answering. The 3 529 accounts remained exactly where they were. Patricia still owned them, and Caleb, Sophie, and Owen remained the named beneficiaries. I never asked for the money back, never tried to control the accounts, and never suggested the children should lose what had already been saved. Their schools continued, their activities continued, and Owen still had care after class. The consequence was not ruin. It was that the adults responsible for those lives had to begin paying for them with their own money. Without my $400 each month, Patricia and George cut restaurant meals, canceled a planned cruise, and met with a financial advisor about the house. The new 529 deposits stopped. George later told me they could continue the mortgage by drawing more from retirement, refinance into a smaller payment, or sell and move somewhere cheaper. Patricia described every option as something I had done to her. During one argument, George finally told her, "We should never have depended on Denise while treating Lena as outside the family." Patricia accused him of abandoning her when things became difficult. He answered that he had been abandoning Denise for years by letting Patricia make every decision he did not want to challenge. Their marriage did not collapse, but the arrangement inside it did. Patricia could no longer call every choice hers while expecting George to shield her from the consequences. Her first letter to Lena arrived 3 weeks after the meeting. It was handwritten on the same floral stationery she had used when she mailed back the shirt. The apology began, "I'm sorry you were hurt by what happened." Lena read the sentence, folded the page, and handed it to me. "She's sorry I got hurt," Lena said. "She isn't sorry she did it." I did not tell her to be generous or remind her that Patricia was old. I asked what she wanted me to do with the letter. Lena said she did not want it in her room, so I placed it in the document box with the rest of the family records. The next day, George sent a separate note. He wrote that he had heard Kendra exclude her, understood what it meant, and added his own words because agreeing with the louder people felt easier than protecting her. He did not mention the mortgage, ask for a visit, or tell her he missed her as a way of creating obligation. Lena read his letter twice before writing, "Not yet," beneath his signature. I mailed the page back exactly as she had written it, and George did not call to negotiate. The school project remained on Lena's desk longer than any other assignment that year. Her teacher offered an alternative, but after several weeks, Lena decided she wanted to complete Where I Come From on her own terms. She included a photograph of me holding her after birth, a map with our townhouse marked by a small gold star, and the pale blue letter I had written before the embryo transfer. In one corner, she placed a copy of the clinic image and labeled it, "The first picture of me." On presentation day, she asked me to sit near the back of the classroom. Her voice shook during the first paragraph, then steadied when she reached the final page. "Some children are surprises. Some are wishes. I was a decision my mother was brave enough to make." Her classmates listened. One girl asked whether an embryo was smaller than a seed, and a boy said his parents had used IVF too. There was no dramatic applause or sudden lesson that fixed everything. The teacher thanked Lena for explaining her story, and Lena returned to her seat looking relieved rather than transformed. That was enough. The money I had once directed toward other households began following the life I actually valued. I opened a dedicated education and opportunity account for Lena, increased my emergency savings, and raised my retirement contribution to the level I had reduced years earlier. I scheduled the bathroom repair I had postponed twice. None of those decisions made us wealthy. They simply stopped requiring our future to shrink so someone else's could expand. With part of the money I had expected to spend on another family retreat, I booked a simple weekend beside a small lake. Lena and I stayed in a cabin with mismatched dishes, a narrow dock, and no organized photograph. We burned pancakes the first morning and spent the afternoon drawing designs for shirts we did not order yet. I missed the noise of cousins and the familiar arguments over board games. Missing them surprised me, but it did not make the boundary wrong. Michael joined us for dinner several times during the months that followed. He never asked Lena to discuss the lodge, the donor, or the letters. He asked about her drawings, listened while she explained why certain fabric inks cracked, and accepted silence when she no longer wanted to talk. The first time she left the table without finishing a story, he did not chase her or ask me whether he had done something wrong. He simply helped clear the dishes and let her return when she was ready. His steadiness frightened me in a different way. Brian had once been steady too, at least while the future remained vague. One evening after Lena went upstairs, I told Michael I would not spend years waiting for another man to decide whether he wanted a life with me. "I can move slowly," I said. "I cannot live inside someday again." Michael did not answer with a promise designed to calm me. He looked directly at me and said, "I want a life with you. I also understand that Lena gets a voice in what that life feels like." He did not ask me to choose between caution and love. He made his intention clear and left the pace open. Months later, Patricia sent a second letter. This one contained no explanation about tradition, stress, or misunderstanding. She wrote, "I treated the way you were born as something that made you less worthy. I used your mother's help while excluding you from what that help created. That was wrong." Lena kept the letter. She was not ready to see Patricia, and I did not turn the better apology into a deadline for forgiveness. Accountability had finally begun, but beginning was not the same as repairing 10 years of harm. A full year after the retreat, Michael asked me to walk with him after dinner. We stopped beneath the maple tree at the end of my street, where he told me he wanted to marry me. There was no crowd, no ring hidden in dessert, and no speech about saving us. He simply said he wanted to build the rest of his life beside mine. I did not answer immediately. I thought of Brian's endless future tense, Patricia's family picture, and Lena carrying the shirt back into the house with empty hands. Then I said, "Lena and I were a family before you. I need to know you understand that." Michael nodded. "I'm not asking to complete it. I'm asking whether there is room for me in it." I did not answer Michael beneath the maple tree. I told him I loved him, then asked for one night before I decided anything. He did not look disappointed or ask what more I needed to know. He kissed my forehead, said he understood, and went home without leaving me with a deadline. The next morning, I found Lena at the kitchen table drawing shirt designs in the margins of her homework. I sat across from her and told her Michael had asked me to marry him. I did not show her a ring or announce that I had accepted. I asked how the idea made her feel. She pressed her pencil against the page until the tip broke. "You said we were enough. Why do you need him? Being enough does not mean we are never allowed to love anyone else." She pushed the broken pencil aside. "Are you doing this because Grandpa said I should have a father?" "No. There is nothing about our family that needs to be fixed. I love Michael because of who he is, not because of a role other people think is missing." Lena looked toward the living room, where Michael had helped us install new shelves the previous weekend. He had measured twice, asked where she wanted them, and left when the job was finished without turning the afternoon into a performance about taking care of us. "What if he changes after you marry him?" she asked. "What if he leaves?" I wanted to promise he never would. Mothers are tempted to build certainty wherever their children are frightened, even when certainty would be a lie. "No one can guarantee that a relationship will never fail," I said. "I can promise that I will not disappear into him, and you will never have to earn your place with me. I will not let another person decide your future or mine while we wait for him to choose us." "Brian made you wait?" "Yes. And Grandma made you pay?" "Yes." Lena picked up another pencil. "Michael doesn't do either one." "No, he doesn't." She was quiet before asking, "Did you already tell him yes?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, but I am not asking you to make the decision for me. I only need to know what would help you feel safe. I want him to tell me what he expects." That evening, Michael came for dinner. Lena barely touched her food, and he did not fill the silence with jokes or reassurance. When the plates were cleared, she asked him to stay at the table while I remained beside her. "Mom said you want to marry her," she began. "I do. Do you want me to call you Dad?" Michael rested his hands on the table. "I love your mother, and I care about you. I don't get to decide what I am to you. You do. Michael works for me. What if you adopt me?" "That would only happen if you wanted it, after everyone understood what it meant and had enough time to be certain." "I'm not ready. Not yet is an answer." Lena watched him carefully, perhaps waiting for his face to show disappointment. It did not. He asked whether she had any other questions, and when she said no, he thanked her for asking the difficult ones. After she went upstairs, I walked Michael to the porch. "You knew exactly what to say." "No," he replied. "I knew what not to take from her." That was when I understood why loving him felt different from waiting for Brian. Michael did not offer vague promises and ask me to build my life around them. He had stated what he wanted, accepted that Lena's trust had its own pace, and left both of us free to answer honestly. I accepted his proposal the following evening. There was no dramatic announcement. He placed the ring on my finger at the same kitchen table where Lena had asked whether she was my second choice, and Lena took one photograph before returning to her homework. We planned a small wedding for 6 months later, which placed it approximately 18 months after the retreat. Michael contributed as my partner, not as someone financing a rescue. We divided expenses, chose a modest lakeside cabin venue, and invited only people who had respected the boundaries we established. George earned one supervised visit with Lena after months of specific apologies and consistent restraint. He never pressured her to call, never asked me to restore money, and never used his age as a reason she should hurry. During their first visit, he told her, "I knew what your aunt meant, and I supported her instead of protecting you. That was wrong." Lena listened, spoke with him for 20 minutes, and chose to see him again several weeks later. Patricia had written the right words, but she still slipped explanations into later messages about tradition, stress, and how difficult the year had been. Lena was not ready to see her, and a wedding invitation was not a reward for producing one acceptable apology. Patricia did not attend. Kendra remained outside our lives. She never offered an apology that named what she had done. Mark occasionally sent neutral updates about the children, but contact with the cousins resumed only in small, carefully supervised ways when Lena asked for it. We did not require universal forgiveness to prove we had healed. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lena asked Michael and me to join her at the dining table. 3 folded shirts were stacked in front of her. Each was soft gray with a small pine tree she had drawn herself. Beneath it were the words, "We chose each other." She handed the first shirt to me and kept the second. Then she held the third in both hands while looking at Michael. "Do I have to call you Dad if I give you this?" "No." "Do I have to let you adopt me?" "No." "Do I have to know now if I ever will?" "No." Lena extended the shirt toward him. "Then you can be in the picture." Michael accepted it without pulling her into a hug. He thanked her, unfolded the shirt, and asked whether she had designed the pine tree. Within minutes, they were discussing whether the branches should have been wider, which allowed the moment to remain hers instead of becoming a ceremony for the adults. On the wedding morning, the 3 of us wore the shirts while eating pancakes in the cabin kitchen. Later, I changed into a simple ivory dress. Michael put on a dark suit, and Lena wore a blue dress she had chosen herself. Friends from work, 2 cousins who had apologized, and a few people who had shown us steady kindness gathered beside the lake. George sat in the second row. He did not ask why he was not closer. After the ceremony, the photographer arranged several group pictures, then asked for one of the 3 of us. I waited for Lena to choose where she wanted to stand. She stepped between Michael and me without being called, pulled us closer by the hands, and checked that no one was standing on the hem of my dress. As the photographer raised the camera, Lena glanced down and said, "Dad, you're standing on Mom's dress." Michael froze for less than a second. He did not ask her to repeat it, look at me for confirmation, or turn the word into something she had to defend. He stepped aside and said, "Got it." Lena adjusted my skirt and faced the camera as though nothing unusual had happened. I followed her example because the gift was not the word itself. The gift was that she had spoken it without fear, obligation, or anyone placing it in her mouth. Later, Lena set her own camera on the dock and started the timer. She ran back too quickly, bumped into my shoulder, and made all 3 of us laugh just as the picture was taken. The horizon tilted. Michael's eyes were half closed, and part of Lena's hair covered my face. It was the least organized family photograph I had ever owned. It was also the first one that required no payment, permission, or performance. For years, I had paid to keep a place for us in their family picture. It took 1 missing shirt, 86 calls, and a hidden ledger for me to understand the truth. Lena and I had never been incomplete. We had only been standing in front of people who needed us to believe we were. Michael did not make us a real family. We had always been one. He simply respected our family long enough for Lena to make room for him in the picture.